very excited to be here. It's actually been, my first S4 was 2014, I believe, when it was much smaller. And at that point, I was working for a company called SourceFire. We had just been acquired by Cisco. And my focus that whole time was on ICS, and ICS cybersecurity, or IT, or IIoT, or the other smattering of acronyms you'd like to give it. But one of the things I remember, I put together a presentation for one of our sales leaders to talk about ICS security. And he said, Mark, with all due respect, this really just looks like the same stuff told a different way. And I said, you know what? It is exactly all the same stuff told a different way. And that is my really long way of just saying we had a hole in our story. What we were doing was taking a lot of IT-centric security ideas and trying to tweak them and tell an ICS story. And so in the meantime, I moved on from there for a couple years, did threat intel, endpoint protection, and in the meantime, there's the Centrio acquisition, and so I'll talk about that a little bit. And so what was really exciting is actually there is a real ICS security story to tell here. So I think what I'll do today is just in the session that we have here, talk a little bit, just kind of how we see the world, if you will, what we think some of the issues are, what it is we are trying to address. What I will talk about is why the acquisition was of Centrio. There are a number of players in this market, but there are specific reasons why Cisco decided to acquire Centrio versus some of the others. The product is CyberVision. And so I'll talk about what CyberVision is and does, where we see the future going, and then also two integrations and why we see value in that. And I think, well, let's just kind of jump into this here. So using a utility as an example, I'll argue that probably the biggest challenge, or at least the biggest first hurdle in securing ICS is around visibility. We just don't know what's out there. So I think if you go to any of your customers, or if you're an asset owner yourself, to be able to say, yes, I know everything that is on my network. I have yet to hear anybody say that. And it's just the nature of the beast. I remember in my IT past, for example, just how things would go from test into production. Things just happen. So but the issue is we just don't know what's out there. So it's very, very difficult to go and defend and protect something that you can't see. Now, the issue, I will also argue, there's lots of things I like to argue about in the ICS space, but it's not a failure of OT. I think one of the things that has complicated the matter is, again, like I was just talking about, an IT approach to discovery doesn't work for ICS. There are stories of being able to brick devices from just a port scan. So I think part of the issue has been that there has not been the right technology put out there that is what I would call ICS friendly. So I think that has contributed to that. Now, in the meantime, you've seen a number of startups, which is great. And so you'll see a number of them here, Centrio in that same group. So there's validation for that market. And now what we're seeing too, I think further validation are the acquisitions. I think there was one earlier this morning, I'm here now. And so as we go forward, now I think the real issue beyond the visibility too is if you consider scale. I mean, this is not what we have to deal with in the IT space. So if you want to go out and put devices out on windmills, at substations, on pole tops, we quickly run into scale. And the way it's been approached so far, and I think this is the thing that we're going to start moving away from, is the idea of using span, right? So the idea, we could go out there with a technology, and I'm saying we as an industry, and say, look, we will discover your ICS. All we have to do is attach to your switch, run a span port, and basically duplicate all of your traffic. Great stopgap, it has its place, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But really, when we look at the idea of either setting up an out-of-band network for the span traffic, if you're looking at, you really don't want to put it over the regular production network, you quickly get into an issue around scale. And that's one of the things that we wanted to address, not just the visibility, but how do we go and do this in a way that scales and is not extremely expensive. So this is where Centrio comes in, and this is why we looked at acquiring Centrio versus some of the other players that are out there. And one of the things that I think is important, so when I got a buddy of mine, I'd been on the security organization in Cisco, and a buddy of mine moved over into our, what we call the IoT BU or business unit, and was starting to talk to me about Centrio. So I said, all right, let me check it out. So I took the role. So I'm, by the way, product manager for Centrio, for Cybervision. And so one of the things that I was initially impressed with is this idea of collaboration between IT and OT. And I think, I remember when convergence was the big word, but I think it brought along a negative connotation to it. The idea of convergence was somehow actually we're going to take IT security practices and approaches and technologies and push that into the OT space. What I like about this collaborative approach is there's something for both IT and OT. So the idea that from an OT perspective, really what we're looking at with gaining visibility is to help with understanding processes, help to run more efficiently. So it's actually more of a process-based focus than it is, like, of course we do vulnerabilities, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think the idea is there's value for OT. It was originally created for an operations user to use. So it's going to show what's the value to that group. But also then, too, being able to provide something for the IT user, so the Security Operations Center. So one example, as we perform discovery, one of the things that we're able to do is group assets together. So now, say if we look at something like, say, a crypto miner is discovered on an industrial device. Well, the idea is we now understand what process that is a part of. IT can look at that and go, okay, I may have a CVE score of 9, but if I understand that it's in a critical process, I can now work with OT to actually schedule some maintenance time rather than have what you traditionally find of IT freaking out because they need to get this thing patched and the OT side not wanting to touch production. So that's one of the things that I found most interesting. For us within Cisco, it like I mentioned, it really plugged a hole in our portfolio. And what we're looking at, and I can talk about it more, but looking at, number one, plugging into our security portfolio. So now what we take is Cybervision and feeding that information up. So going from a standalone, if you will, to feeding information into the SOC. But also, too, looking out is how we can start seeing that out at the edge. And I think that's something else that I'll talk about in a moment. But when you realize what we have from the security portfolio of now being able to look at segmentation, software-based, hardware-based segmentation, things like our Cisco threat response, being able to work from the information that we're able to pull out of the OT side and make that part of the SOC. We saw a lot of value there. And again, if you think about it, the life cycle of events that can occur, why this is of value. From an IT perspective, you look at it and go, okay, this is a world that we didn't have visibility in. We didn't understand what the context was for the rest of the organization. So with Cybervision running in that network, now that becomes part of the whole and gives that kind of visibility. And again, where we saw this is when we looked at our portfolio, saw it as a natural fit to extend the capabilities. So Cybervision itself. So if you're not familiar with Cybervision, there were three things that I've kind of touched on here and there that I think are the hallmarks, if you will, of what we're trying to address with Cybervision. So again, number one, with visibility. Now, how we do that? The first is through deep packet inspection. And what we're looking at is, and I think I have it in the next slide, but it's a two-tier architecture. So you have the sensors as the first tier. And the idea is what we are looking at, of course, is the traffic that's coming by. And we're looking for industrial protocols. And so the idea that we can normalize those based on deep packet inspection and understand what kind of devices, make, model, software revision, see variables, read, write, modify, anything that is going to go through that protocol that we're then able to see. We can then map that for the users. We're looking at communication patterns as well, so that we start establishing a baseline too of what normal is for that environment. The insights perspective, again, this is more, we're focused on helping operators understand what their processes are doing with what communications are going on there, what users are trying to affect, what process, and so on. So again, really in these two areas, you know, it's more of an operations focus. And then when we come over to detection, we're looking for a couple different things. One, anomalies. So if we see changes in configurations, number one, that's something that on operations they're going to want to know about. Looking at new communication patterns. If you're familiar with the Mirai botnet, show of hands, anyone remember Mirai? A couple folks. Okay, and it was weird, then Toyota came out with a Mirai. It really confused me. But the idea, just to give you a quick one, so Mirai was a botnet that attacked mostly, and I have to admit, I did find this kind of funny, IP-enabled security devices and turn those against their owners. So if you think of an IP-enabled camera, what it would do is then they could use that to pivot within an organization. So this idea that if all of a sudden one day an IP camera starts speaking to a robot or to a PLC, those are the kind of things that we'll detect and look for. And then, of course, looking at vulnerability information, too, so that we understand what the risk profile is. So based on it, so really what we have, and I'll talk about, too, what we've released so far. So I think we just acquired Centrio just in August, and we released the first phase of the integration in December. And I don't know, this is actually my third time. Actually, this is one of my first times as an acquiree. In my career, since I've moved to the vendor side, I've been acquired 3 out of 3 times. So I definitely say the wise investor follows my career, because it seems to be whenever I go somewhere, I get acquired. Now, I've seen it go well, and I've seen it go very poorly. And so in this case, the fact that we were able to turn this around in 4 months is impressive, if not causing a loss of sleep. But this is what we have today. So there's the 2-tier architecture that I talked about. So what we have is the sensor, and then it goes up to what's called the center. So what we have today is this hardware-based sensor. So in there, it's performing, that's where the deep packet inspection takes place. We're running snort in here as well, so taking advantage of the Talos signatures and content in order to look for anomalies there as well. So what you'll find is many hardware-based sensors deployed through an environment, all going up to what we call the center, which is the aggregation point. Now, this center can run as hardware or virtual, so depending on the need, it'll run on one of the Cisco servers, it'll run on VMware, it'll run on Hyper-V. Where we see the future, and this is one of the big reasons for the investment, is then moving out into the network itself. So I think I have it in the next slide. So I'll talk about that more in a little bit, but that's where we really see this going. That's what made sense about Centrio's architecture and why we acquired Centrio, was really, this is where we see everything going. The other thing, and I'll come more to this at the end, but are these types of integrations. So as you would imagine, deep, yes, sir? Is it okay to ask questions? Yeah, please ask questions. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'm only taking questions at the end. Yeah. If you have an easy question, ask me now. If the hard ones will come after we've stopped recording. No, all right, so TLS 1.3, I will need to go into depth now. That is something that we have to look at, because right now what we are doing is looking at things pretty much in the clear. But I can give you a better answer when I have one of my guys talk to you. So yeah, thank you for stumping the chump. We're only like, 10 minutes in. Nah, just giving you a hard time. So, and then two, what I'll talk about are the third-party integrations. And so now the idea, though, with that, looking at an edge-based architecture, when we start looking at this deployment model, it's a matter of then software running out on the network. So when you think, if any of you are in the utility space, how much does a truck roll cost? How many substations will a common utility have? Hundreds, thousands? Where are they going to be located? So if a customer has to go and roll a truck to every substation and need to take up more physical space, that's where we talk about this scale and the cost associated with that approach. This is why being able to start putting sensors into the network, and again, from the edge, being able to reach these locations that are typically pretty hard, that's the value we're seeing, and that's where it's going, and that's why we made this investment. Just to put it in another way, and I think what's important to note here, so when it comes to from a deployment model, I mean, there are many options, but what I really wanted to illustrate is by pushing out to the edge, by getting closer to the device, and because we do all of that deep packet inspection at the edge, what we're looking at for traffic coming back up to the center for analysis is, I want to say, between 3 to 5% additional load on the network. So what we are not talking about then is starting to put in those out-of-band networks. We're not looking at putting in even more devices out there. So the idea here is to have something with minimal impact. Now, reality will say not every customer is ready to just go and deploy this. You can't just do this out of the box. And I think particularly in the ICS space, and we've got gear that's going to sit out there for years. That's why we do have the option as well. I mentioned that first box. That does work off span, but it gives you an option to start putting in aggregation points further up. So as we see environments start to move more towards digitization and use this embedded model, we provide that flexibility and kind of, what's the word I want to use? Just along that journey there. So that's why I was saying I do see some value in span, but for the most part, it's not optimal. Okay. So again, a little real world side of things. So for integrations, we look at this and say, all right, I mean, I started in the IT space in '98. It's been a couple years. I've 29 a few times over. And so the thing was, like, when I worked in large enterprises, a lot of times too, I did not want to go with one single vendor. I like to break it up. So I think there's value in using a single vendor. There are certain economies of scale that you get. For anyone playing BS Bingo, there you go. I just said economies of scale. But the reality is you don't go into an environment and find all Cisco gear. So the idea here is, yes, deep integrations within the Cisco portfolio, but also too, I mean, we're working with our competitors here. We're also looking at extending out into capabilities that we just don't have, because that's what our customers need. That's what our customers want. So what you're not seeing is an all Cisco capability. I think that's unrealistic and really doesn't help out our customers too much. So one of the things I think, oh no, all right, and after this I'm going to have a use case because we have a little bit of time. Normally, as a heavily caffeinated Bostonian, I do tend to end before my time is up, so I at least want to work through a use case that's saved to the end. So anyways, one of the things I think that I'll end on too is helping our customers, because it's one thing to sell software, to sell boxes, whatever. I mean, it's really about the implementation and understanding how that's done. So I think I talked a bit about the first two. One of the things that we work on are called Cisco Validated Designs, or CVDs, but really to help our customers, we work through detailed model deployments, if you will, for different industries and so on, to really help give guidance on how things would look in the real world. So doing the same thing for cyber vision, how that interacts with, how that performs or how it's deployed in different verticals, as well as with different technologies. And also too, on our services side, setting up specific services just for cyber vision. So whether it's assessment, deployment, tune-ups, et cetera. We also see a lot of value too for a lot of our partners as well, because they're very much interested in standing up different practices all around ICS security. Okay, so what I want to do, since we have the time, I do want to talk about one particular use case to give an idea too of the value that we see here. Is anyone here familiar with Identity Services Engine, or ISE? Okay, got one. All right, a couple. Couple. All right, so for those who don't know, so Identity Services Engine, the 30-second review is basically network access control. It will profile devices on the network, and policies are created to allow access, types of access, times, I mean, you name it. So where we saw a lot of value here, one thing that ICE did not do is have any kind of visibility or understanding of industrial networks. So CyberVision, through the deep packet inspection that I talked about, being able to profile devices. So what that will do is feed up into Identity Services Engine so we can have or prevent scenarios like I talked about with no IP-enabled camera should ever talk to a PLC or ever talk to a robot. So there's that kind of situation. It does all this through software-based enforcement. So we're actually able to enforce these policies on the switch, on the router, et cetera. So when it comes to segmentation, it's very easy to say you need segmentation. It's a whole other thing to actually design it and deploy it. And with ICE being software-based, what it does is gives us that capability to put these policies in place. CyberVision then profiles the information, populates it within ICE. Now, one of the things, too, you can have policies in place for, say, emergency situations. So let's just say we have that camera that is going after a particular device, or maybe there's a crypto miner on a device. What we don't want to have happen is that IT approach of we're going to isolate this node and kill it, because we don't know what that's going to take down in an industrial process. So what ICE is able to do is provide the flexibility to basically, what I would say, ring fence a process. So that process can operate, it can still work. What we are then able to do is just really prevent any of that malicious communications from coming out and affecting the rest of the environment while operations still run. And in that case, we're able to kind of find that middle ground, say, all right, let the business run, we'll find the right time, or let actually the operations team and the IT teams figure out the right time to mitigate that threat. But what we're not doing is going in and impacting operations unnecessarily. So with that, we've got about 4, almost 5 minutes left for questions. Any questions? So the question is basically, in order to kind of go through this scenario, what does that endpoint need installed? Is that fair?
An agent or...
Yeah, no, it does not need an agent, because in this case, what ICE is doing is enforcing, we call them security group tags. But basically what it is, the switches and routers and devices that support ICE's capabilities, which we have many in our portfolio, that will then block the traffic. So there's no agent that actually goes on the device. We're managing that access to the network through the network. Okay. Yes, sir.
When you say
Yeah, if I understand the question, so as you're talking about, so span now, but will we have the capability within Cisco networking equipment to run the sensor? That's totally where we see everything going. That's where we see the value. So absolutely.
You may want to mention